The flame hit the parchment and the edges curled black, surrendering to the heat. Sato didn't flinch. He watched his own signature dissolve into gray ash, the ink bubbling and twisting before turning into smoke. I didn't blink either. I held the Zippo steady, my thumb pressing down on the flint wheel until the metal burned my skin. The treaty was supposed to last 10 years. It hadn't lasted 10 minutes. Sato's men reached for their holsters, the leather creaking in the silence of the boardroom, but Sato raised a single hand. He leaned forward, the smell of expensive cologne clashing with the acrid scent of burning legal documents. He looked at the charred remains drifting to the polished mahogany table and then up at me. "You've just invited a war," he whispered. "I didn't invite it," I replied, the lighter clicking shut with a sharp metallic snap. "I started it." That was the moment the balance shifted. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with the static of coming violence. We were in the Roppongi Spire, 30 stories above the Tokyo rain, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass that showed nothing but the dark, uncaring city. I had walked into that room as a subordinate, a man who bowed to Sato's authority, and I was walking out as an executioner. 6 months earlier I was just Kenji. A man managing the docks, keeping the shipments moving, swallowing the insults Sato spat at me every time we crossed paths. I kept my head down. I swept the floors. I did the work he was too lazy to handle. He treated me like a fixture of the warehouse, a ghost in the machinery, until the day he decided my sister was a loose end. That was when the ghost stopped being invisible. I'm going to tell you how I burned his empire to the ground, but you need to understand that this wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It was about the way Sato looked at her photo on my desk and crushed it under his boot. If you believe that some debts can only be paid in fire, hit the like button. Let the algorithm know that loyalty is the only currency that matters in this world. The setup for this night began in a damp basement in Ueno. I wasn't alone. I had Sato's own logistics manager, a man named Hideo, tied to a metal chair that had rusted into the floor. He knew about the treaties, the kickbacks, the safe houses. He knew where the money was buried, and he knew why Sato wanted my sister erased. I didn't ask questions. I just let him look at the pliers on the table. Hideo started talking before I even touched the handle. He spilled the locations of the 3 accounts that funded Sato's personal security. Every word he spoke was a nail in Sato's coffin. I was writing it all down, mapping out the architecture of his life. Then Hideo made a mistake. He tried to reach for the hidden blade taped under the chair. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I just stepped on his hand hard until the bone snapped with a wet, sickening crunch. "The vault?" I said, my voice barely a breath. "Where is the override code?" "He'll kill you," Hideo wheezed, spit bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "He'll kill everyone you've ever spoken to." "He's going to try," I said. I grabbed the phone on the table. It rang once. Sato picked up. "Who is this?" Sato's voice was smooth, bored. "Check your watch, Sato," I said. 3 minutes until the transfer fails. I hung up. The countdown had begun. This wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. I had already compromised his server. The millions he was moving to secure his seat at the upcoming syndicate vote were currently hemorrhaging into a ghost account I'd set up weeks ago. I wasn't just taking his money, I was taking his influence. I looked at the monitor. The progress bar for the transfer hit 50%. Sato would be scrambling. He'd be calling his fixers, his hackers, his muscle. He would be looking for me. I grabbed my coat, the cold steel of the handgun pressing against my ribs, and walked out into the rain. I turned into a narrow alley, the walls slick with grime, and ducked into the service entrance of the spire. I had the keycard Hideo had surrendered. It felt heavy in my pocket, a piece of plastic that gave me access to the belly of the beast. The elevator ride was silent. The numbers climbed, 10, 20, 25. Every floor was a step closer to the end of my life or the end of his. My reflection stared back at me in the brushed steel of the doors. My face was a mask, stripped of everything but the objective. The doors opened on the 30th floor. A guard stood there, coffee in one hand, phone in the other. He didn't see me until I was already moving. I took him down with a single blow to the throat, catching his body before it hit the floor so the thud wouldn't echo. I dragged him into the closet. I moved toward the boardroom. The door was heavy, soundproofed. I pressed my ear against the wood. Sato's voice drifted through, low and rhythmic. He was talking to the senator, the man who provided his political cover. "The treaty ensures the status quo," Sato was saying. "Kenji is a non-factor." I pushed the door open. Sato turned, his eyes narrowing. The cigar in his hand dropped to the carpet. He looked at the guard slumped in the doorway behind me, then back to my face. You're early, Sato said. I'm right on time, I replied. I walked to the table and dropped the ledger Hideo had given me. It slid across the wood and stopped right in front of the senator. The senator didn't want to look. He knew what was in there. Sato's hand twitched toward his holster, but I had my own weapon drawn and aimed before his fingers even cleared his suit jacket. Don't, I said. The silence stretched thin, ready to snap. Sato smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You think this changes anything? You kill me, you kill yourself. I'm already dead, Sato, I said. My pocket buzzed. I didn't look down. I kept the barrel leveled at his chest. Check it, he insisted. I pulled the phone out with my free hand. A text message. A photo. It was a picture of the warehouse where my sister worked. A bomb sat on the loading dock, a red timer counting down. 45 seconds left. My stomach turned over, a sharp, cold spike of adrenaline piercing through my resolve. If I pulled this trigger, the warehouse would go up. If I ran to save her, Sato would kill me in the back. He had calculated this. 45 seconds to decide who lived and who died. I looked at the photo, then at Sato. 45 seconds. You played a good game, Kenji, Sato said, his voice dripping with arrogance. But you're just a pawn. I didn't run. I didn't put the gun down. Instead, I reached out and grabbed the edge of the boardroom table, flipping it with a roar, sending the senator scrambling. Sato fired, the bullet whistling past my ear, tearing through the glass behind me. I dove behind the overturned table, the marble top taking the impact of the next round. 40 seconds. I fired blindly over the top of the table, not aiming for his body, but for the chandelier above him. The crystal exploded in a shower of glass, raining down on him, forcing him to cover his face. That was my opening. I sprinted for the door, my heart hammering against my ribs, the sound of the timer in my head matching my frantic stride. 30 seconds. I hit the hallway, shoulder-checking a guard who tried to intercept me. I didn't stop. I hit the elevator button, but it was already locked down. I ran for the emergency stairs, my boots skidding on the concrete, the sound of heavy boots following behind me. Sato's men. They were coming. 20 seconds. I reached the bottom floor, the lobby a cavern of marble and silence. I sprinted through the revolving door and out into the deluge of the Tokyo night. My car was parked 2 blocks away. I ran, my lungs burning, the rain lashing at my eyes. 10 seconds. I reached the car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking. I scrambled, diving onto the pavement, grabbing the keys and jamming them into the lock. 5 seconds. I cranked the engine. It roared to life. I threw the car into drive and floored it, the tires squealing against the wet asphalt. I was racing toward the warehouse, toward the fire. 2 seconds. I saw the warehouse in the distance. The lights were out. I accelerated, pushing the engine to its limit, the needle climbing into the red. I didn't know if I would make it. I didn't know if she was still inside. 1 second. The world went white. The blast wave hit my car like a physical wall, the vehicle lifting off its wheels and spinning. Glass shattered, the sound of the explosion deafening, a roar that swallowed the city. I fought the steering wheel, the car slamming into a light pole, the front end crumpling like paper. Silence followed. A ringing in my ears. Smoke rising from the engine. I pushed the door open. It wouldn't budge. I kicked it once, twice, the metal groaning until it popped off the hinges. I tumbled out onto the wet street, my clothes soaked in gasoline and rain. The warehouse was a skeleton of twisted steel, flames licking the sky, the heat already blistering my skin. I stood up, swaying, my vision blurred. I looked for her. I looked for anyone. Then I heard it. A cough. Coming from the alleyway behind the structure. I ran toward the sound, the fire casting long, dancing shadows against the brick. There, curled in a heap of trash and debris, was a figure. My sister. She was alive. She looked up at me, her face smeared with ash, her eyes wide with shock. She grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my skin. They knew, she whispered. They knew everything. I pulled her to her feet, shielding her from the heat. We were alive. But we were exposed. Sato knew exactly where we were, and he knew we had nothing left to lose. If you believe that the people who hurt the ones we love deserve to face the consequences, hit the like button. Let's make sure Sato knows his time is running out. We have to move, I said. Where? She asked. To the docks, I replied. I have something that belongs to him. The docks were the only place where the law didn't reach. It was where Sato laundered his money, where he stored his shipments of illegal goods. It was his soft underbelly. I knew the layout, the security rotations, the blind spots. I had worked there for years. We traveled through the back roads, avoiding the main arteries of the city where his patrols would be looking for us. The car sputtered, the engine dying a mile out. We abandoned it and walked the rest of the way, the damp cold of the night seeping into our bones. The docks were silent, a graveyard of shipping containers stacked like jagged teeth against the horizon. The smell of salt water and diesel fuel hung in the air. We moved through the shadows, staying low, the darkness our only ally. I pointed to a container near the end of the pier. "That's it." "What's in it?" she asked. "Proof," I said. "Everything I gathered over the last 6 months. The bank accounts, the phone records, the names of the officers he's paid off. It's all here." We reached the container, but something was wrong. The lock was broken. I pulled my gun, checking the perimeter. Nothing. No movement. No guards. It was too quiet. Sato didn't leave his assets unguarded. I pulled the door open slowly, the heavy metal grating against the concrete. The container was empty. I stood there, staring at the barren floor, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Sato hadn't just destroyed the warehouse. He had cleaned house. He had anticipated my move. He knew exactly where the proof was hidden. "Kenji," she said, her voice trembling. "What now?" I turned back to the docks, my mind racing. If he had the proof, he would destroy it. He would erase any record of his crimes. He would walk free, and we would be the ones labeled as the terrorists, the arsonists, the criminals. "We don't need the proof anymore," I said, a dark resolution settling in my chest. "What do you mean?" "We need the witness," I said. I pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. "Hello?" a voice answered. "It's me," I said. "Sato is at the spire. He's celebrating." "I know," the voice replied. It was the police chief. The one man who hated Sato as much as I did, but who had been paralyzed by his corruption for a decade. "He's vulnerable," I said. "But you have to move now. If you wait, he'll burn the building down with everyone inside." "I can't move without cause," the chief said. "I'll give you cause," I said. I disconnected. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Finish it," I said. I handed her the keys to a motorcycle I'd hidden in a nearby shed. "Go. Get to the border. Don't look back." "I'm not leaving you," she said. "You have to," I said. "If I don't make it out, you're the only one who knows the truth. You're the one who has to tell it." She hesitated, then grabbed the keys. I watched her ride away, the engine fading into the distance. I was alone again. I walked back into the city, heading toward the spire. The police were already on the move. I could hear the sirens in the distance, a rising chorus of wails that signaled the end. But they wouldn't get there in time to stop Sato from fleeing. I had to intercept him. I bypassed the front entrance and used the service elevator, bypassing the security systems I'd already tripped. I knew he would head for the helipad. He always had an exit strategy. The elevator hit the roof. The doors slid open to the sound of helicopter blades churning the air. Sato was there, climbing into the cabin. He looked up and saw me, his face twisting into a snarl. He didn't have his men. They were all downstairs, caught in the police dragnet. It was just the two of us. He pulled a gun, but I was faster. I fired, hitting the door of the helicopter, shattering the glass. He ducked, scrambling for cover. I charged the helicopter, the wind from the blades whipping my hair, the roar deafening. I climbed onto the skid, the helicopter beginning to lift off. We wrestled in the open doorway, the ground rushing away below us. My fingers dug into his throat, his hands clawing at my face. He was strong, desperate. "You can't win," he shouted over the noise. "I don't have to win," I said. "I just have to make sure you lose." I reached for the controls, grabbing the cyclic and pulling it hard to the left. The helicopter banked violently, the cabin tilting. We slid toward the opening, gravity pulling at us. Sato grabbed a handhold, his eyes wide with the first hint of genuine fear. "Kenji, don't." I looked at him. I saw the man who had destroyed my life, who had terrorized the city for years. "For my sister," I said. I let go of the control and kicked him. He tumbled out of the helicopter, his body plummeting toward the roof of the spire. I watched him fall, his form shrinking against the lights of the city below. The helicopter stabilized, but I had lost control. I had to jump. I leaped, my body arching through the air, hitting the roof hard. I rolled, the impact knocking the wind out of me. I laid there for a moment, the sky spinning above me. The helicopter spiraled away, crashing into the side of a nearby building, a fireball erupting into the night sky. I sat up, my body aching, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The sirens were louder now. The roof hatch burst open and tactical teams flooded the area. I didn't run. I sat there, arms raised, the rain washing the blood and ash from my skin. The chief stepped out of the team, his face grim. He looked at me, then at the burning wreckage of the helicopter. "Is it done?" he asked. "It's done," I said. He signaled his men. They approached, their weapons lowered. They didn't cuff me. They just stood there watching the city burn. "You're a free man," the chief said. "For now." I stood up, my legs trembling. I looked out over the city. It was still there, the lights twinkling as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. The empire had fallen. I walked past the chief toward the stairs. I had a long walk ahead of me. I didn't look back. But as I reached the bottom floor, I saw something that froze me in my tracks. Standing in the lobby waiting for me was a man in a black suit. A man I had never seen before. He held a phone and he held it out to me. "He wants to talk to you," the man said. I looked at the phone. It was ringing. I knew that ring. I hesitated. I had won. I had survived. But as I stared at the phone, I realized the game had never really ended. I reached out and took the phone. "Hello," I said. "You did well, Kenji," a voice whispered. "But you forgot one thing." "What?" I asked. The treaty wasn't just signed by Sato. The line went dead. I looked at the phone, my heart sinking. There was one more name on the list. And they were the ones who had really started this fire. If you think this story has more to give, and you want to know who was pulling the strings, subscribe. The truth is never as simple as it seems. I walked out of the building into the cold, uncaring night. I didn't know who the voice was. I didn't know what they wanted. But I knew one thing. I was just getting started. I stepped onto the street, the rain beginning to fall harder. A black sedan pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. Inside sat a woman I recognized. The senator's wife. "Get in," she said. I looked at the car, then at the dark street behind me. I had a choice. I could walk away. I could disappear. But I had come too far. I opened the door and got in. The sedan swerved through the narrow, rain-slicked streets of the district, the tires hissing against the asphalt. Elena didn't look at me. She stared straight ahead, her silhouette framed by the passing neon of the city. She adjusted the diamond bracelet on her wrist, the metal clicking softly. "You think this is about Sato," she said. It wasn't a question. "I think Sato is dead," I replied, watching the reflection of the headlights in the side mirror. "And I think you're in a hurry to capitalize on the vacancy." "Sato was a blunt instrument," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "He was useful for clearing the docks and managing the street-level distribution. But he had become a liability. He was sloppy. He brought the police to our doorstep with his theatrics. He needed to be removed. You were simply the most efficient tool available for that extraction." The car turned into an underground parking structure. The concrete pillars rushed by like prison bars. I kept my hand inside my jacket, fingers brushing the grip of my piece. "And now?" I asked. "Now the power vacuum is being filled," she said, finally turning to look at me. Her eyes were hard, flat, like polished river stones. "The architect doesn't like instability. He wants the syndicate running like a watch. You've demonstrated a unique capability for disruption. I have a new target for you. Someone who has proven difficult to replace." "I'm not a contract killer, Elena." "You're a man who burnt an entire building to the ground to settle a personal score," she retorted. "Don't pretend to have morals now. It's beneath us both." The car slowed to a halt in front of a dark, nondescript door labeled maintenance. Two men in dark coats stood waiting. They didn't look like guards, they looked like cleaners. "Get out," she commanded. I stepped onto the damp concrete. My boots echoed in the vast, empty space. My sister. That was the only thing that mattered. If she was here, if this was the leverage they were using to keep me in the harness, I had to be smart. I had to be invisible. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice tight. "Inside," Elena said, stepping out of the car. "But before you see her, you need to understand the stakes. If you fail this next task, if you hesitate even for a second, it won't be the warehouse that burns. It will be everything you have left." She gestured to the door. I walked toward it, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every step felt like walking into a snare. I reached for the handle, the cold steel biting into my palm. "Kenji," she called out. I stopped, my hand on the latch. "The man you're going after is inside," she said. I threw the door open, expecting a fight, expecting a room filled with gunmen. The room was empty. Except for a screen. A flat panel display mounted on the far wall. It flickered to life, showing a live feed of a familiar dockside loading area. And in the center of the frame, my sister was tied to a chair. She wasn't alone. A man stood behind her, a knife resting against her throat. His face was obscured by a digital mask, the architect. I stared at the screen, the breath leaving my lungs. I hadn't come here to negotiate. I had come to kill. Look closely, Kenji, the architect's voice distorted through the speakers. Do you recognize this place? I knew it. It was the dock where I'd started my life in the syndicate. Where I'd spent my first year moving crates. I'm coming for you, I said, my voice shaking. I know, the architect replied. That's exactly what I'm counting on. The feed cut to black. I turned around, reaching for my weapon, but the door was already closed. I was locked in. And from the shadows behind me, I heard the distinctive click of a safety being disengaged. I dropped to the floor, my shoulder hitting the cold concrete just as the muzzle flash illuminated the corner of the room. A bullet whistled through the space where my head had been a second ago, chewing into the brick behind me. I rolled, tucking into a crouch, and fired back toward the flash. The grunt of pain confirmed I'd hit something. Stay down, a voice shouted. I didn't stay down. I moved. I scrambled behind a workbench, the heavy metal providing cover. My heart was a drum in my ears. They had planned this. The car ride, the empty room, the video feed, it was all designed to keep me stationary, to keep me trapped. I scanned the room. The overhead lights flickered, casting long, erratic shadows. There were two of them. I could hear their breathing, the rustle of their coats as they moved through the darkness. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the lighter, and flicked it open. The flame was a tiny beacon in the gloom. I tossed it toward the far corner of the room, behind a stack of crates. What the? One of them moved toward the distraction. That was my opening. I lunged, tackle grabbing the second man, slamming him into the workbench. We grappled, my hand finding his throat, his knee slamming into my side. I felt a rib crack, a sharp, white-hot spike of agony. I gritted my teeth and threw my weight into him, crushing his windpipe against the edge of the table. He collapsed limp. The first man turned, his gun leveling at me. I threw a wrench from the table, my only projectile. It hit him in the temple, the sickening thud echoing in the room. He stumbled back, his shot going wild, shattering the screen that had displayed my sister. I didn't wait for him to recover. I was on him, stripping the weapon from his hand and pistol whipping him until he stopped moving. I stood in the center of the room, gasping for air, the smell of gunpowder and sweat thick in my nose. My side burned, a deep, pulsating ache. I checked the men. Both were unconscious but alive. I didn't have time to finish them. I searched their pockets. Keys, a radio, and a piece of paper. I unfolded the paper. A map. A hand-drawn sketch of the docks. The architect wasn't just waiting for me. He was baiting me. If you've ever had to fight for the people you love when the entire world seems stacked against you, hit the like button. Let's make sure this story reaches the people who know what it's like to have your back against the wall. I grabbed the radio. A voice crackled through. Target is compromised. Initiate Protocol 2. Protocol 2. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I didn't want to be here when it happened. I ran to the maintenance door and kicked it open. The parking garage was quiet, too quiet. The sedan was gone. Elena was gone. I sprinted toward the exit ramp, my boots slapping against the concrete. I reached the street level and dove behind a dumpster. A black van was idling at the curb, the doors sliding open. Men in tactical gear were pouring out, carrying heavy rifles. They weren't police. They weren't syndicate muscle. They were professionals. I realized then the scope of this. Elena wasn't just a partner, she was part of a larger machine. A machine that cleaned up after the syndicate, a machine that erased its mistakes. I was the mistake. I turned and ran the other way toward the subway entrance. I had to disappear. I had to get to the docks on my own terms. I slid down the station stairs, my breath coming in jagged gasps. The turnstile was locked. I vaulted over it, the turn of the metal catching my belt. I tore it off, falling into the station. The train was already pulling in, the screech of metal on metal deafening. I jumped onto the platform, ducking behind a pillar just as the tactical team reached the top of the stairs. I watched them scan the crowd. I was a ghost again. I boarded the train, the doors hissing shut. I leaned my head against the glass, my side throbbing. I watched the city lights blur into streaks of neon. I was going to the docks. I was going to find my sister. And I was going to burn whatever machine they were using to hunt me. But as the train pulled into the next station, a notification flashed on my phone. A text from an unknown number. Turn around, Kenji. Or she dies now. I looked at the phone, my hand trembling. I looked at the platform. I had to choose. The train slowed, the doors preparing to open. I looked at the door. I looked at the screen. And then I made my move. The doors hissed open. The station was empty, a cavernous, tiled tomb. I stepped out, the air stale and heavy with the scent of damp earth. I didn't turn around. I walked toward the exit, toward the street, toward the trap. I wasn't playing by their rules anymore. If they wanted me at the docks, I would give them the docks. But they wouldn't get the Kenji they expected. I reached the surface, the rain still falling, a relentless, icy curtain. I found a phone booth, the glass shattered, the phone hanging by a frayed wire. I dialed a number. "Yeah?" a voice answered. It was Sato's former fixer. The one who had betrayed him for money. "I need a weapon," I said. "And I need it now." "Kenji? You're a dead man walking." "I'm a busy man walking," I replied. 10 minutes. The old warehouse. "You have the cash?" "I have the leverage," I said. I hung up and started walking. My side was screaming, the pain radiating through my core with every step. I felt the wet warmth of blood soaking into my shirt. I didn't care. The pain was grounding. It was a reminder that I was still in the fight. I reached the warehouse. It was deserted, a relic of the industrial boom that had long since passed. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The fixer was waiting. He held a bag, his eyes shifting nervously. "You're a fool," he said, pushing the bag toward me. "The architect has eyes everywhere. You're not just fighting the syndicate, you're fighting the city." "Then I'll burn the city," I said, opening the bag. Inside was a high-caliber handgun, 2 extra magazines, and a combat knife. "Where is she?" I asked, gripping the handle of the weapon. "The North Dock," he said, his voice dropping. "But Kenji, it's a kill zone. They've rigged the entire perimeter. You go in there, you don't come out." "I don't plan to," I said. I turned to leave, but he grabbed my arm. "Wait," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver device. "This is a jammer. It'll cut their communications for 30 seconds. It's all you've got." I took the device, nodding. It was a lifeline. I walked out of the warehouse, the rain lashing at me. I was ready. The North Dock was a mile away. I ran, the pain ignored, the adrenaline fueling my stride. I reached the perimeter, the fence looming like a jagged wall. I climbed it, the wire tearing at my clothes, my hands bleeding. I dropped to the other side, rolling into the mud. The docks were illuminated by floodlights, the bright, artificial glow harsh against the dark harbor. I crept forward, staying in the shadows of the shipping containers. I could see them. My sister still tied to the chair. The architect standing in front of her. And 10 men, armed and waiting. It was a fortress, but I had the jammer. I checked my weapon. 1 in the chamber. 2 mags ready. I moved to the edge of the light. 30 seconds. That was all I had. I took a breath, the air filling my lungs with the scent of salt and death. "For her," I whispered. I clicked the jammer. The floodlights flickered and died. The radio in the lead guard's hand went dead. Total darkness. The confusion was instant. Shouts, the sound of boots scrambling, the roar of panic. I moved. I was a shadow in the night, a phantom in the dark. I reached the first guard, a quick strike to the base of the skull, and he was down. Second guard, a shot to the chest, his body falling silently. Third guard, I used the knife, a brutal, efficient motion. I was inside the perimeter. I was within reach. I could see the architect. He was staring into the dark, his face a mask of confusion. "Find him," he shouted. I stepped out of the shadow. "I'm right here," I said. He spun, his gun rising, but I was faster. I kicked the weapon from his hand, the metal clattering across the concrete. He tried to run, but I grabbed him, slamming him into the chair. "Where is she?" I demanded. "You're too late," he laughed, his voice a distorted rasp. "Look at the floor." I looked down. My stomach dropped. A red light was pulsing. A bomb. Connected to the chair. "She doesn't move," he whispered. "You don't move. We all go together." I stared at the device. The timer was counting down. 5 seconds. 4 seconds. 3 seconds. I looked at my sister. I looked at the architect. I had no choice. I lunged for the device. I pulled the wires, the sparks flying, the smell of ozone filling the air. 1 second. The light stopped pulsing. Silence. I breathed a sigh of relief. But then the architect began to laugh. "You think that was the trigger?" I froze. "It was the timer," he said. I heard a click. A click from behind me. I turned around. The lead guard was standing there, a detonator in his hand. And he was smiling. "Game over, Kenji," he said. I stood there, the weapon in my hand useless. I had saved her, but I had sealed our fate. The detonator glowed. My heart stood still. "Goodbye," the guard said. And he pressed the button. The world didn't shatter. It hissed. A high-pitched, localized frequency tore through the air, vibrating in my teeth. The guard's thumb had triggered a sonic disruptor, not a high explosive. My vision blurred, white spots dancing across my field of vision. I hit the ground, dragging my sister with me, shielding her body with my own as the guard lunged forward, a tactical baton already whistling through the air. I caught the blow on my forearm. The wood cracked against bone, a dull, aching thud. I didn't wince. I lashed out, my fist finding his jaw, the crunch of cartilage satisfying in the ringing silence. He crumbled. I didn't wait for him to stand. I snatched the detonator from his limp hand, smashed it against the concrete, and grabbed my sister by the wrist. "Run," I barked. She didn't need to be told twice. We sprinted into the darkness of the shipping yard, the floodlights still dead, the jammer still holding the perimeter in a shroud of shadow. Behind us, more lights flickered to life, not the floodlights but the tactical torches of a dozen search teams. They were moving in a grid. They knew the layout. They were herding us toward the water. We vaulted over a stack of pallets, our breath coming in ragged, freezing gasps. "They're not just trying to kill us," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of boots on gravel. "They're trying to contain us." "Let them try," I said. I stopped. I reached into my bag and pulled out the second mag. My fingers were slick with blood and sweat. I checked the chamber. It was clean. "Stay low," I told her. "Follow the shadows. If I don't give the signal, you don't move." I didn't wait for her reply. I peeled off, moving toward the edge of the containers, flanking the search team. I needed to know who was commanding them. I needed a face. I climbed the rusted ladder of a container, the metal biting into my palms, until I was perched on the roof. Below, the men had stopped. A figure in a pristine gray suit stood in the center of the grid, a tablet in his hand. He wasn't wearing a tactical vest. He wasn't armed. He was standing there watching the screen as if it were a game. The light from the tablet illuminated his face. It wasn't a stranger. It was the senator. The man I had seen in the boardroom with Sato. The man who had been negotiating the treaty. He tapped his screen and the search team shifted, closing the net on the container where I'd left my sister. The realization hit me harder than the blast. The senator wasn't just covering for the syndicate. He was the syndicate. Sato was just the disposable face of a much larger, much older machine. My finger tightened on the trigger. I had a clear shot. I could end it right there. But I saw the men around him. They had thermal scopes. They were looking at the container. They were about to find her. If you believe the people who use their power to prey on the vulnerable deserve to have that power ripped away, hit the like button. Let's make sure this story reaches the people who know that truth is the deadliest weapon of all. I raised the rifle, but the senator suddenly looked up, staring directly at the container I was perched on. He smiled, his teeth bright in the gloom. "I know you're there, Kenji," he said, his voice amplified by a collar mic, "and I know the girl is in the container to your left. You have two choices: drop the weapon and come down, or watch me liquidate the only family you have left." He nodded to his men. They raised their rifles. I looked at the senator. I looked at the container. I had no choice. I leaped. I didn't leap for safety. I leaped for the senator. As I fell, I opened fire, a desperate, uncontrolled spray of lead that forced the team to break formation. I hit the ground rolling, the impact jarring my teeth, and sprinted toward the senator's position. "Kill him," the senator screamed. The world erupted in muzzle flashes. I was running through a storm of steel, my heart pounding, my life hanging on a thread. I reached the senator, tackled him to the ground, and pinned him. "It's over," I roared. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just leaned in close, his breath smelling of mint and corruption. "Look behind you, Kenji." I turned. The container was already burning. I didn't look back at the flames. I couldn't. If I looked back, I'd stop fighting. And if I stopped fighting, I was already dead. I drove my fist into the senator's face, the skin splitting, blood spraying onto the collar of his expensive suit. He slumped back, his nose flattened, a dull, hollow thud against the pavement. The search team was regrouping. They were shouting, the chaotic noise of tactical coordination washing over the docks. I didn't care about the fire. I didn't care about the senator. I scrambled to my feet, my side burning, my breath a jagged tear in my chest. I ran. I didn't run away. I ran toward the burning container. The heat was a physical wall, a roaring beast that threatened to consume me. I didn't think about the physics of it. I didn't think about the fire code. I just acted. I grabbed a steel pipe from the wreckage of the pier, jammed it into the twisted door and heaved. The metal groaned, protesting, and then gave way. The inside was a furnace of swirling black smoke. "Hannah!" I screamed. Nothing. I plunged inside, the air hot enough to sear my lungs. I crawled, my hands feeling the floor, the heat blistering my skin. I reached the back of the container. She wasn't there. There was only a chair, the ropes burnt away, and a single, taped message on the floor. I grabbed it. I crawled back out, gasping for fresh, cool air, the smoke billowing out behind me like a funeral shroud. I stood up, swaying, the world spinning. I checked the tape. It was a recording. I played it. "She's not here, Kenji. She's at the gala. The one you weren't invited to. You have 20 minutes before the final vote. If you want her, come to the spire. Come to the top floor." The senator had played me. He had used the containers as a decoy, a tactical distraction to keep me busy while he moved her to his inner sanctum. He wanted me to come to the spire. He wanted me to walk into the heart of his power, to humiliate me in front of the entire city's elite. It was a trap. A blatant, arrogance-fueled trap. And I was going to walk right into it. I didn't run for the car. I ran for the bike I had stashed 3 blocks over. I straddled the machine, the engine roaring to life with a desperate, metallic scream. I tore out of the alley onto the main road. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slicks of black glass. I pushed the bike to its limit, the needle climbing past 100, the wind tearing at my face. I didn't see the police cars until they were already behind me, their sirens wailing like banshees in the night. They weren't here to arrest me. They were here to run me off the road. A cruiser slammed into my rear tire, the bike wobbling, the rubber skidding on the wet asphalt. I fought for control, my arms burning, my entire body a knot of tension. I didn't break. I didn't yield. I wove through the traffic, a blur of motion, a ghost in the machine. I reached the spire. The front entrance was blocked by barricades. I didn't stop. I drove the bike up the pedestrian stairs, the metal grinding against the stone, the engine whining in protest. I crashed through the glass doors, the shards exploding like diamonds in the lobby light. I skidded to a halt in the center of the lobby, the bike laying on its side, steam hissing from the radiator. The lobby went silent. Dozens of people in tuxedos and evening gowns stared at the man in the shredded coat, covered in blood and ash, standing in the center of their pristine white floor. I stood up. I pulled the pistol. "Where is the senator?" I asked, my voice echoing in the vast space. Nobody spoke. Then the elevator doors opened. The senator stepped out, his face bruised, his hand bandaged. He smiled at me, a calm, terrifying expression of total control. "You're late, Kenji," he said. "Where is she?" He pointed to the glass-walled elevator rising behind him. Hannah was inside. She wasn't tied up. She was holding a drink. And she was looking at me with a look of pure, unadulterated pity. "She's not a hostage, Kenji," the senator said. "She's a partner." The world tilted. I stood there, the gun heavy in my hand, the lobby lights reflecting off the marble floor. My sister, Hannah, stood in the glass elevator, the crystal flute clinking against her teeth. She didn't look terrified. She didn't look coerced. She looked calm. "Or, you're making a scene, Kenji," she said, her voice amplified by the lobby's acoustics. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thin, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. "Why?" I asked, the words scraping out of my throat. "Because you were always the sentimental one," she said. She stepped out of the elevator, her heels clicking against the stone with rhythmic, lethal precision. "You were always the one who cared about the right thing. About justice. About the truth. Do you know how much money that costs, Kenji? How much time?" The senator stood behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. It wasn't a hostage grip. It was a gesture of ownership. Of alliance. "We didn't destroy the warehouse to hurt you," the senator added, his voice smooth. "We destroyed it because it was a tax write-off, and you were the perfect cover for the arson. We needed a fall guy, and you were too busy playing the hero to notice the match in your own hand." The laughter rippled through the lobby. Not a loud, boisterous laugh, but a polite, sophisticated titter from the elite gathered for the vote. They were all in on it. The police chief, the corporate heads, the judges, they were all watching the show. I was the entertainment. If you think the quiet ones are the real heroes and that the people who use their status to destroy others deserve to be exposed, hit the like button. Let's make sure this story is heard. I looked at the gun in my hand. It was a tool. A weapon. "You think you've won?" I asked. "We haven't just won, Kenji," Hannah said. "We've refined. You burnt the city to save a ghost. There was never anyone to save." She took a sip of her drink. Kill him, the senator said to the guards standing by the revolving doors. They stepped forward, their rifles raising, their faces blank. I didn't shoot them. I shot the ceiling. A single, booming shot that shattered the high-voltage sprinkler system. Water and fire-retardant foam exploded from the ceiling, a blinding, chaotic torrent of chemical white that filled the room. Screams erupted. The elite scattered, their expensive clothes ruined, their composure shattered. In the chaos, I didn't look for Hannah. I didn't look for the senator. I sprinted toward the main circuit panel on the wall, the one I had studied 6 months ago, the one I had memorized. Stop him, the senator shouted. But it was too late. I jammed my knife into the panel, shorting the connection. The entire building went dark. The elevators stopped. The security system, the alarms, the digital locks. Everything reset to zero. I stood in the darkness, the sound of water rushing, the smell of foam thick in the air. You can't hide in the dark, Kenji, the senator's voice roared. I'm not hiding, I whispered to the empty room. I moved. I had the advantage. I knew the layout. They relied on their lights, their systems, their technology. I relied on the floor. I struck the first guard, the sound of the blow wet and sharp. I struck the second, the rifle clattering to the floor. I was a ghost. I moved through the darkness, stripping them one by one. I reached the center of the lobby. I felt a hand on my arm. Kenji. It was Hannah. Join us, she whispered, her voice close to my ear. It's not too late. You can be the king of this city. I felt the barrel of a gun press against my ribs. She had a weapon. She was playing me again. It was never about justice, was it? I asked. It was never about anything, she said. I grabbed her wrist, twisting, the gun dropping. I pushed her away. You're right, I said. It was never about justice. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the detonator. It was about the fire. I pressed the button. The entire ground floor of the spire exploded. Not the building. The evidence. The server room directly beneath us. The floor gave way, a gaping hole opening in the marble, swallowing the guards, the senator, and the truth. I leaped, grabbing the edge of the elevator shaft, dangling above the abyss. I looked down. The server room was engulfed in flames. The data was gone. The money was gone. The empire was gone. I hung there, the heat rising, the smoke filling my lungs. I was alone. But for the first time in 6 months I was free. The senator reached out, his hand grasping for the edge. I looked at him. It's over, I said. I let go of his hand. And watched him fall. My fingers clawed into the steel grating, the metal slick with sweat and cooling ash. I hauled myself over the edge of the elevator shaft, collapsing onto the marble floor of the lobby. My lungs burned, a wet, raspy sound that clawed at my throat. Above, the spire groaned, the structural integrity of the lower levels failing as the fires in the server room fed on the reinforced wiring. Hannah stood 10 feet away. She wasn't holding a weapon anymore. She was watching the flames lick at the edges of the elevator shaft, her expression unreadable, a cool mask of detachment that I barely recognized. She looked like a stranger wearing my sister's face. You really did it, she said. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't hold the weight of the city falling. It was just a statement of fact. You destroyed the entire ledger. Years of accumulation. You've bankrupted the syndicate, sure, but you've also wiped out the leverage that kept this city from eating itself alive. I saved the city from you, I wheezed, pushing myself to my feet. Every muscle in my body protested, a chorus of sharp, stinging reminders of the fight. You saved yourself, she corrected, walking toward me. She stopped just outside the reach of my hands. You wanted to be the hero, Kenji. You wanted to be the man who burned the villain. But look around. The senator is gone, but the board? The investors? They're already waiting for the next signal. The machine doesn't stop because one gear broke. Then I'll break the next one, I said, my hand instinctively going to the empty space where my gun had been before I dropped it into the abyss. You can't, she whispered. Because to break them you'd have to become them. You'd have to be as cold, as calculating, and as ruthless as the people you claim to hate. Look at your hands, brother. They aren't clean. You didn't just burn the files. You burned the lives of every person who relied on the stability that syndicate money provided. You think you're righteous? You're just a man with a lighter and a god complex. Her words cut deeper than the shrapnel from the elevator shaft. I looked at my hands, calloused, scarred, smeared with oil and dried blood. She was right. I hadn't dismantled a regime. I had just created a vacuum, and I was the one who had cleared the path for the next monster to step in. If this story broke your heart the way it broke mine, Leave a like so I know to tell more stories about the cost of vengeance. Come with me, she said, holding out a hand. It was the same hand that had held a drink while I fought for my life. We can leave. We have enough stashed away to vanish before the authorities reach the top floor. We don't have to be the ones who stay in the ashes. I looked at her hand. I looked at the fire reflecting in her eyes. I realized then that she hadn't been a hostage and she hadn't been a partner. She had been the architect all along, or at least she had learned to be. She was the survival instinct of our family distilled into something sharp and dangerous. I'm not going with you, I said. She stared at me for a long time, the only sound the roar of the fire consuming the spire's heart. Then she nodded, a slow, sad movement of her head. You were always a fool, Kenji. She turned and walked toward the emergency exit, her silhouette disappearing into the swirling white foam and shadow. I didn't try to stop her. I couldn't. She was gone long before she reached the door. I turned to the lobby. The elite were gone, the guards were scattered, and the building was breathing its last. I walked through the broken glass, past the crumpled bike and out into the Tokyo night. The rain had started again, washing the grime from the street, but it couldn't wash away the smell of the smoke that clung to my jacket. I walked until my legs gave out, until the spire was nothing but a distant, glowing ember against the skyline. I sat on a bench in a quiet park, the darkness folding around me like a heavy blanket. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't answer. I took the phone, looked at the black screen for a moment and dropped it into a storm drain. The city moved on. Lights flickered in windows, cars hurried toward homes, and somewhere someone was plotting the next move. But I was done with moves. I was done with the board. I was just a man in the rain, listening to the silence of the night. I leaned back, closed my eyes and let the cold water hit my face. I had burned the world to save a ghost, and in the end the ghost was the only thing I had left. The morning light began to bleed gray over the horizon, promising a new day, but I didn't care about tomorrow. I only cared about the stillness. I stood up, left the bench and walked into the morning, a ghost among the living, the fire finally extinguished in my chest. I kept walking until the city was just a memory, and the road ahead was the only thing that mattered.